Welcome in, Dween Nation. We are the Dween Sports Podcast, and we are just about to get started. But before we do, we'd love if you could like, comment, subscribe, and share so we can continue to be your fantasy sports podcast. Thanks for being part of Dween Nation, and enjoy the show. Welcome in, Dween Nation. This is your host, Justin Paez. And yes, my brother Genoa is not on here, but being your resident fantasy fanatic here on YouTube, it being week 0 for the NFL, we're not getting any NFL football this weekend. I want to go where all the hype is, where my eyes will be glued to this weekend. I'll be at the game as well, and that is a college football game. It's week 1 of the college football season, and I want to dive into the top 10 games that I have on the slate that we just need to talk through and predict and outlook going forward for all of these teams. Obviously, you see here my banner here is Julian Sayin and Arch Manning, because that is probably the game of the week. The 1 seed, the 3 seed, Ohio State and Texas, but they're down the line. I go in order of when the games are happening. So if you're curious, man, where does he talk about Texas and Ohio State? Well, they play 11 a.m. on Saturday, so it's a couple games in. Might even be the second, because I know that there's games actually even today, which I'm recording Thursday night. Obviously there's Boise State plays tonight, and then Auburn and Baylor is the big game that we will start off talking about, because these two teams, there's a lot of expectations here. For me, I'm really high on Baylor going into the season because you have so much continuity, so much returning with David Aranda as the coach. You got Sawyer Robertson, who I think is a really, really good quarterback. I'm not going to throw him into the Heisman consideration, but I think he's a guy that can really help lead a team, especially in the Big 12, where I feel like there's a lot of room and there's a lot of opportunity for somebody to like take over as the top team in the conference. Obviously, last year was Arizona State, but with those changes, with Cam Scadaboo going to the NFL, I think they're still going to be a good team. But I think Baylor's in line to be arguably the best team in the conference. You also bring back your running back Bryson Washington, who was an 1,000-yard rusher with double-digit touchdowns in 2024. So he's really solid. You bring back your leading 2 wide receivers in 2024, and Josh Cameron and Ashton Hawkins. And then you also bring in transfer from Alabama and Kobe Prentice. So they're really setting up, especially on offense, to be a force. And even on the defense, there's a lot of continuity there, a lot of returning pieces. And so I'm a big fan of Baylor. Plus, you're at McLean Stadium in Waco. So it's a home game, but it is against an SEC opponent in Auburn. And so I want to dive into what Auburn has to offer, because obviously the history of Auburn has had really good seasons, and they've been a really good team, but not last year. Last year was very much a disappointing season. Honestly, all the time under Hugh Freeze thus far in Auburn has not been good. And you go into this year bringing in Jackson Arnold. You have freshman Deuce Knight maybe waiting in the wings, as well as the Stanford quarterback. What is his name? Ashton Daniels, who I don't love, but I think Jackson Arnold obviously is kind of the X factor here. I know that he's the quarterback, but if he plays well, I think Auburn wins this game. Where I am not betting on that is because this, in fall camp, Hugh Freeze, the reports around Jackson Arnold have not been positive. They've been having to make things easier for him because, I don't know, he's just not adjusting well enough. And maybe, his struggles at Oklahoma aren't just going to stay at Oklahoma. Maybe it's just where he's at in his collegiate career. But there's a lot of good things with Auburn too. They did lose Jarquez Hunter to the draft this season, but those wide receivers, man, Cam Coleman is the next top guy. And you bring in from, I believe it was Georgia Tech, Eric Singleton Jr. I mean, he is a beast, and he is going to be really good this season. I mean, obviously last year they had Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was really, really good as well. I think Singleton, finds himself in that role as well, even though I think Coleman is the leading receiver there, because he's really talented. Obviously, I was able to watch a good amount of their games, especially the one where they, hosted in Jordan-Hare against the Texas A&M Aggies, and those wide receivers just cooked us. And Peyton Thorne cooked us, and Peyton Thorne was not a good quarterback last year, and so I think that the standard is low right now for quarterback play in Auburn for them to take that step forward, but I just don't see it happening for Jackson Arnold, unfortunately. And so I'm going to go with Baylor to get the victory here. And honestly, that's a really bad start for Auburn, because Auburn, you got that tough SEC slate where you're going to need to start stacking wins, especially in the non-conference. You want to have those games because in the SEC, no game is given. So I think that Auburn starts out slow, and I think it's going to be not the beginning of the end, but I think Auburn's really going to have a tough season in 2025. While Baylor, you get the SEC victory, you get the home victory, and so I think that Baylor's going to be off to the races in the Big 12, while Auburn not going to be great, not going to be great for sure. We move into Saturday's slate, and we're talking about Syracuse against Tennessee, not at Tennessee. This game is a neutral site game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. So I think that they're playing obviously on even playing fields here, but both teams are going into this season with a lot of losses from 2024. Like last year was really good seasons for both of them, really. First year or second year with Fran Brown, and obviously Tennessee was able to make it the college football playoff. They did lose to the eventual champions. So, I mean, even though it was a beatdown, I don't want to hate too much on it. Yeah, so Fran Brown is going into his second season. But yeah, last season, Syracuse was kind of an exciting team to watch. They had Kyle McCord, who was phenomenal. I believe he threw for 4,700 yards and 34 touchdowns. Like, he was a beast. And then you got Trevor Pena, who was a phenomenal wide receiver. Now he's transferred to Penn State, so they lose their number one wide receiver, which is unfortunate, very unfortunate. They lose their number two wide receiver in Jackson Meeks. He's no longer there. So those are a couple things that are really going to change things for them. And the big change, obviously, going from Kyle McCord to Steve Angeli from Notre Dame. And I actually don't dislike Steve Angeli. This was more of a late transfer for Syracuse to bring in Angeli from Notre Dame. But obviously, Angeli did not win the battle last year against Riley Leonard. It worked out for Notre Dame. They made the national championship. So we'll see what Angeli's got. Obviously, he was named a starter, I believe, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. So he's got the reins of the offense. But I think it's just a very new-look team for Syracuse this year. But I don't want to just count him out because Tennessee looks a lot different as well. Syracuse also lost their starting running back as well in the Quint Allen. I believe he's on the Jacksonville Jaguars now. So both teams lost a lot. I'll dive into Tennessee. Obviously, the Nico Miliab. Oh, man, I already messed it up, even though I literally watched a video before this. But Nico is no longer there. He's in UCLA. They swapped quarterbacks. Now Joey Aguilar is in Tennessee. This happened in the spring. So really, Aguilar's not going to have a lot of time he didn't have a lot of time with the starting offense before having to now he's the guy. Now he's the guy that they're going to go to. But I think this is really going to be a sloppy football game, similar to Farmageddon that we got last week in Dublin with Kansas State and Iowa State. It was just a really sloppy football game, and maybe one or two big plays are going to decide who wins it, because Tennessee lost a lot too. They lost Dante Thornton to the NFL. They lost Squirrel White to Florida State. Brew McCoy's in the NFL now. I don't think he's signed to a team, but they lost their three leading wide receivers last year. They lose Dylan Sampson as well to the league. He's on the Browns now. So Tennessee looks a lot different. The defense obviously lost James Pierce Jr. and Jermon McCoy, who's a phenomenal cornerback, is going to miss a lot of the seasons. Gosh, man, that's what makes this game tough, because it's like, dude, who is going to win this game? It's neutral site. All these changes are there. But honestly, I'm going to go with the upset. I'm going with Syracuse to get the job done. I think Fran Brown he's going to become one of the more nationally recognized head coaches. He's kind of early in that tenure with Syracuse still. But I think that, the only way that Tennessee wins is on the backs of their defense. And they're missing a couple guys. And I just think Syracuse is going to come in with a quarterback that I honestly prefer. I prefer Steve Angeli to Joey Aguilar. So I think that I think Syracuse gets the job done. And I know it's kind of crazy. I am an SEC guy because I go to Texas A&M, but I'm not biased. I'm not biased, as you can see, because now I've picked Auburn to lose and Tennessee to lose. But that's kind of how I see this game playing out in Atlanta. Game 3 that we're discussing is probably the game of the week that I mentioned at the top of the show. But Texas and Ohio State is a very exciting must-watch game. I do think it's still going to be a sloppy game just because we got two new starting quarterbacks, technically. I know Arch started a couple games last year. But, they're at the Horseshoe up in Columbus, Ohio. I think that, it's not cold, though. We're not in December. Tennessee got the tough end of the stick with having to go play at Ohio State, and it was cold as heck. Texas doesn't have to run through that. And I honestly, I just think both teams did lose a considerable amount of players to the draft, but Ohio State lost more, and they lost some really tough pieces, especially on the offensive line. Obviously, you lost your two star running backs and Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins, but you do have the duo of Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. I think that's really, really good. And Max Clare at the tight end position. But it really comes down to Julian Sayin and how effective can he be in his role? Can he be a stable enough game manager to really help Ohio State? Because, back in, the semifinal last college football in the college football playoffs, Will Howard was able to be a good game manager, and they relied on, Jack Sawyer in that defense. That's why they beat Texas, because Quinn Ewers not that great of a quarterback. And Jack Sawyer and that defense took advantage. And that's why they won the football game, because even Jeremiah Smith, 1 catch, 3 yards in that football game. So they were able to take him out of it completely. I don't know if he was getting shadowed by Jahdae Barron or what, but Texas had a good game plan to not get him involved in that game. And even though they still lost, they were able to take out that wide receiver one. And now you look at this game, does Jeremiah Smith want to right his wrongs? He probably really does. And I think he is a top player in this in collegiate sports. I think that he's worthy of Heisman consideration, probably definitely top 5. I mean, you got Garrett, you got Lil Nuss, you got Cade Klubnik, you got Jeremiah Love, you got Arch here is worth consideration, and then you got Jeremiah Smith. But yeah, so the outlook of this game, I think that the fact that Ohio State has lost more. You lost first rounder in Josh Simmons. You lost first rounder in Donovan Jackson. You lose the 2 running backs. I mean, you lose your quarterback to the draft too, and Will Howard. And you lose those coordinators, man. Chip Kelly's in the NFL. I know they brought in Matt Patricia, who's also, a former NFL coach. He was the former head coach of the Lions at one point. Obviously, he was on the Patriots for a while, the Eagles for a bit. But I think it takes time to really gel with new coordinators. While if you look at Texas, they really kept the same kind of setup. So I think that Texas has the advantage, even though they're coming in on the road. And I think Arch Manning is legit. I know the hype is through the ceiling for Arch Manning, but I think that he's going to be a really good quarterback in college football, probably end up being a first overall pick, I'd assume. Welcome to the Saints next season. I think he's going to have that kind of season where he's number 1 pick worthy. And so I think that Texas goes into the Horseshoe and beats Ohio State. Last year they did kind of the same thing where they played the national champion Michigan at Michigan, but it was clear that Michigan wasn't that team anymore, and they dominated Michigan. And I'm not saying Ohio State's not going to fall off like that. I guarantee it. I think that after this loss that they're going to shape up big time because, their hardest game is hosting Penn State, and they own Penn State. So I think Ohio State really runs the table post week 1, but I think that they get shocked at home, just like they did against Michigan at the end of the regular season last year. And Texas wins the game. So that's a 1-2 record for SEC teams thus far. But I think Arch is great. I think Ryan Wingo is great. I think Travion Wisner, and we finally get to see CJ Baxter out there. I hope he can stay healthy. But yeah, both teams still have really deep rosters. That's what you get when you have these pedigree of schools. But I think that Texas right now is the better team. And that's why they were ranked 1. I know AP poll can mean nothing to a lot of people, but I think they're 1 for a reason. I think they're a solid team, and that hurts me to say. But I think Arch Manning is the real deal, so I'm going to go with Texas to beat Ohio State. We jump into the mid-afternoon games with Alabama going to Florida State to Doak Campbell Stadium, and I think that the hype behind this game, the hype that Tommy Castellanos is bringing for Florida State is not a good idea. You should not do that with Alabama. Obviously, there's that video years ago with the Vanderbilt players saying, "Oh, when they come into our stadium or when we get to play them," and then they got donut in the win total or in their score total next week against Alabama with Jalen Hurts. I foresee something similar happening in this football game. I think Alabama, although it will be Ty Simpson's first start, this is his 4th year in the program. I think that he's ready for this moment. It's one of those things, man. He's been waiting his turn, just like just like, I mean, not that Nussmeier is the greatest or anything, but Garrett was waiting his turn and he got it, and he played really well. I think he played really. I know that last year the turnovers weren't great, but I think that's kind of the season we might see from Ty Simpson. I think he's that good. And Kalen DeBoer gets Ryan Grubb back, which I love for this offense. He's the new offensive coordinator. Obviously, he went to the NFL. It wasn't a great term there for one season. They decided to move on from him, but they did win 10 games. So I got to give them some credit. But I think that they're back. They're aligned, DeBoer and Grubb. And then you got Jam Miller. And, of course, obviously the new hotness in the league. We just talked about Jeremiah Smith. But Ryan Williams is also right up there in that conversation. He's really good. And I think that Alabama's going to go into Florida State and beat them and maybe embarrass them. I don't know if I want to go that deep, but I do think that Alabama's that good of a team. And yes, Florida State should be and will be improved from the season they had last year. 2-10 is really, really bad. But I'm not going to go out here and think that they're just going to get back to where they were in 2023, barely missing the college football playoff. Like, that's not going to happen either. I think they're going to jump to that 5-6 win area. But in week 1, it's not going to happen against Alabama. This is one of the more confident picks I have this week. Even though it's the road team I'm picking. But I just think Alabama's by far the better team. Ty Simpson's going to get that opportunity. You still got a lot of great pieces on offense and defense. Probably the best offensive lineman in football in Caden Proctor. And so I think that Alabama gets the victory. Not much past that. Florida, I do like Tommy Castellanos. I think he's a solid quarterback. He had some good showings, some close losses at his time in Boston College. But he really didn't get that many signature wins. I was just looking at his schedule. He beat Florida State last year. Congratulations. Florida State sucked last year. And so now he's joined them, and now he's the lead guy there with Mike Norvell. But I just don't think this team is that good. I still think that I don't know. I don't even think Mike Norvell is the guy, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's bold or not, but I think that they're not ready for this spotlight here, and I don't think they're in line to take down a top 10 team in Alabama. Next game, LSU, Clemson, 6:30 in Death Valley, Memorial Stadium. Clemson's hosting this game, and I think this game is going to be phenomenal. I think that, obviously you have the two Heisman favorites in Cade Klubnik and Garrett Nussmeier, or at least my favorites. And really, I just think that, Clemson's one of those teams that, although the new age of NIL is really going to change this and make this formula not be a thing going into the future, I think that Dabo Swinney has been able to build this roster through recruiting, through high school, and this is like that year. This is the year for them. After this year, I think a lot changes because you have at least 4 first-round picks to me. You have Cade Klubnik, you got Antonio Williams, who's phenomenal, you got Peter Woods and TJ Parker. Those are 4 really, really good players. 2 on the offense, 2 on the defense, so it's pretty balanced. Cade Klubnik's been the guy now for a couple of years, and I think that he's really talented, and Garrett Nussmeier as well is really talented. But he had that, he had some turnover problems last year. They lose Kyron Lacey, rest in peace, man. But they bring in some good talent. I really like Nick Anderson. I like Barian Brown out of Kentucky. I think both of those guys are really good players. And so, man, that makes it tough because I think LSU's offense is really good. I think Caden Durham is a really good player as well. I think he's that similar Clyde Edwards-Helaire type. I know in the NFL it didn't work out, fellas, but in college, Clyde Edwards is a really good back. But that's kind of who I equate him to. I know it's the same team, and that's really easy, but I think that's kind of where I see him there. He might be even faster. So I think that this is going to be an offensive showcase, and it's going to come down to the end of the game. I don't care that that Clemson's at home. I think LSU's going to have some fight with them. Obviously, last year they both lost in week 1. Clemson lost to Georgia. LSU lost to USC. But I just think that Dabo Swinney's a better coach than Brian Kelly. You got both experienced quarterbacks, but I think that Garrett Nussmeier's ceiling is higher than Cade's, but his floor to me is a considerably amount lower. And I think Cade Klubnik's able to be a really stable play there. And that to me, as what I've seen in college football, is that if you have a guy that you can rely on at the quarterback position, you're going to win games. He doesn't have to steal the show every time he's on the field, every time he touches the ball. But if he plays consistently, doesn't give out turnovers too often like Cade Klubnik can do, then I think that that's the real recipe for success here, and that's why I have Clemson winning. The only thing about Clemson that I have doubts with is their running game. Their running back is Adam Randall. He only had 4 attempts last year, and I just think that obviously last year having Phil Maffa, he was a beast. He was really good, but this year's a little bit different there, and I think they're going to have to rely on guys like Antonio Williams and on the arm of Cade Klubnik to really get the victory there. But I think with the way that their team has been constructed, it's a W for Clemson. And for those LSU fans that might be like, well, dang, another first week loss. Like, are we actually good? Are we actually going to make the college football playoff? I think you're more than likely to. I actually have both teams in my predicted college football playoff. I have them at the 9 seed. I have Clemson at the 3 seed. But I just think that this game doesn't hurt you too much unless you get absolutely smoked, which I don't see happening at all. And so I think that both teams are going to go on a good stretch after this. I think Florida in week 3 or 4 LSU in a few weeks plays Florida, and they're going to get right back to it and get that victory there. It's a home game. It's a revenge game because they lost last year to Florida. And Clemson, their only hard game on the rest of the schedule is, I guess there's two. There's two. There's Georgia Tech, who I'm really high on, and South Carolina. But I think that Clemson's in line to be a high-end playoff caliber team. And LSU is still in that consideration as well, but they don't get the job done here at Clemson, even though it is going to come down to the wire. This next game I feel like is going under the radar a good amount. I agree that it's not as exciting as obviously Texas Ohio State or the game we just talked about, LSU Clemson. But I think that this game's going to be very interesting. It's also at a neutral site at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So just like the Tennessee-Syracuse game, it is in Atlanta. So obviously, I believe they're both not crazy far away from Atlanta. But anyway, it's a neutral game. You got Lenore Sellers. You got oh my God, what's his name? Kyron Drones. Both returning at quarterback there. But I think Virginia Tech, their defense is still going to be really solid. They didn't lose too much there. They do lose starting running back Bashal Tootin to the Jaguars, and they lost Jalen Lane to the what team is he's on the Commanders. So those are two pretty considerable pieces there that they lose and have to replace. For South Carolina, they lost Rocket Sanders, even though he's not. I don't even know if he got drafted or was a high draft pick. But he, to me, was really solid for them and helped them in a lot of different spots last season. So the loss that he brings it's tough. That one I feel like is a hard thing for them to replace. I think they still don't have that like star-studded wide receiver or tight end. So I think that they have some returning production there. So maybe somebody takes a step forward. But it really comes down to Lenore Sellers, and I think that he's a beast. I think Dylan Stewart on the defense is a beast, and that literally gives the nod for me. It's just at the end of the day, Shane Beamer in South Carolina last year, the way they were playing at the end of the season was playoff contender worthy. Obviously, they had those couple of losses earlier in the season that didn't allow them to make it. But if they're able to pick up where they left off kind of thing, and they beat Clemson at the end of the year, they won their bowl game. So if they're able to do that, they're going to come here in Atlanta and beat Virginia Tech. I think as long as they don't take that big of a step backwards, I do think they're not going to be as good of a team as they were last year. And I know a lot of people would be like, well, why? You get another year of Lenore Sellers building, his skill sets. But I think that they lost more than people really realize, especially on the defensive side of things. And they still don't have the star-studded skill player that can help Lenore's, but I just think Lenore's is going to do. It's going to be a Lenore's season. Maybe he deserves some more Heisman talk, but he doesn't throw a lot. Obviously, he's more of the rushing quarterback. But I still think that he is going to do enough to beat Kyron Drones and this Virginia Tech team. But that would be a really, really great win for Virginia Tech if they're able to pull it off. I know week 2 they play another SEC opponent, if I'm not wrong. Let me make sure. I think they do play another, or maybe in a couple of weeks they play against. Man, now I'm upset because I do not have it right in front of me. But I will. Let me answer this for you guys. But Virginia Tech, obviously last year they had a couple close losses, especially to Miami. But they get South Carolina, then they host Vanderbilt. So those are two SEC games. Obviously, they're not the top of the conference, but I think those are two really good games for Virginia Tech to really build that resume if they want to make a run. But I think that this is just too tough of a game. South Carolina is going to be just good enough to get the victory there. And maybe Virginia Tech can split next week and upset a Vanderbilt. I think that will be a home game for Virginia Tech. So it's still going to be a really exciting watch. I know you'll probably have your TV screens on. Oh, actually, no, it's a Sunday game. It's a Sunday game, ladies and gentlemen. So you will be able to watch it because the Saturday slate will be done with. This game's happening at 2 p.m. on Sunday Central Time. So you can watch this game and then go and watch Notre Dame Miami, which will be the next team we discuss. Notre Dame and Miami is a very, very interesting game. I think it is going to be sloppier than you may presume it to be because obviously last year Miami was an offense that was so exciting to watch. Cam Ward was so exciting to watch, and you could just expect fireworks every time he stepped onto the field. But I think Carson Beck's a very different quarterback, and yes, maybe people are trying to see that Carson Beck could have a season like Cam Ward did, but I just don't see it. I do think Mario Cristobal is a really solid coach, but I think that this team takes a step back in 2025. You lose Xavier Restrepo, you lose Damian Martinez, you lose number 1 overall pick Cam Ward. You bring in this Georgia quarterback, Carson Beck, who I think is a solid quarterback, but he's not great. I don't think he's a great quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. And yes, he's not getting the hype that like guys like Arch Manning's getting or Drew Aller's getting. I think Penn State's a great team, but Drew Aller's not as good as people are hyping him up to be. I don't want to be rude there. I don't know if people agree or not. Drop your thoughts below. But I think that Carson Beck's a little overrated for me. And you look at the Notre Dame side, obviously CJ Carr, he's green, he's fresh. And I think that if they win on Sunday, it won't be because of him. I don't think he's going to come in there and throw for 300 yards and multiple touchdowns. I don't think he's ready for that. I think that they're going to put him in game manager mode. And it's going to be sloppy. It's going to be like 20-17 kind of game. But I have Notre Dame winning this game on the road just because their defense is still going to be a top-tier defense. Their offensive line is really, really solid. You still got Jeremiah Love, who I think is the best running back in college football and going to be a first-round pick next year. I think he's phenomenal. And I think another guy who doesn't get a ton of talk is Jaden Greathouse. He is going to be really, really good in this season, in this offense. And Marcus Freeman's a phenomenal coach. I think that him and Mario Cristobal, you could argue who's the better coach there. I think Freeman is, in my humble opinion. But I think that with all those things, they still have really good players. I know they lost Riley Leonard, their starting quarterback, but he stepped in and was really good. I think a big vote of confidence is I kind of like Steve Angeli as a prospect, as a player, and he was able to get Carr's performance in spring camp, mainly was a deciding factor in Angeli deciding to transfer. And I know that it was a long, strenuous battle. CJ Carr, and what was it, Kenny Minchie, or even Tyler Buckner in the quarterback room. But Carr's their guy, and I think that he is. I think he's going to be really solid. I do, and it's funny enough. I mean, we'll see, obviously, but Notre Dame plays this game and then has a bye week and then gets to play the Aggies at home. So they're really quick. I mean, this is more of an outlook post game, but they're really quickly going to be able to reassess how week 1 went. And I think that they're going to win a sloppy game and kind of prepare from there. But they're definitely not getting smoked. Miami doesn't have that in store for them. And I just think that the Hurricanes are going to be a good team still. But they're not going to reach the levels they did last year. Last year they were so reliant on Cam Ward's heroics, and Carson Beck is not that quarterback, at least not to me. And that's going to be the deciding factor here. I think the defense is going to get to Carson Beck early and often and rattle him, and then they're going to be able to close the game out with Jeremiah Love on the ground. That's kind of how I see this game playing out. I know this episode's been running, but one more game that I really think is important to discuss is the college football debut of Bill Belichick as the head coach of the Tar Heels against TCU, the TCU Horned Frogs. I think this game is going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be low scoring. It's the only Monday game in college football. So it's going to stand out and be alone there. And I think that at home, UNC is going to get the victory at Kenan Memorial Stadium. I think that Bill Belichick, yes, obviously he's new coach there. Obviously his tenure in New England was a little bit sour the last couple of seasons. And honestly, on the TCU side, I kind of like Josh Hoover. Almost threw for 4,000 yards last year, 27 TDs, was a little turnover happy, but I think he's a really solid quarterback. And I just think that Sonny Dykes is also a really good coach. This one's really tough. I think this might be the toughest game to decide on the entire slate, just because there's so much uncertainty with UNC, but I think there's a ceiling there that could be reached pretty quickly with how good Bill Belichick is as a coach. And Gio Lopez, they just named him as the starter. I think that he's really solid. Obviously, they went with him over the veteran Max Johnson. And I think that Gio Lopez was a really exciting player at Southern Alabama. And I think that he's going to show out. And I think that this game is going to be similar. I could be going out on a stretch too much, but it could be a similar outcome like the TCU Colorado game from 2 years ago, where I feel like a lot of people might be assuming that TCU is going to win. They're 3.5-point favorites on the road. But in Chapel Hill, man, I think that anything can happen. Bill Belichick, he handpicked UNC to go there. I'm sure he could have gone really at any vacant college football opening he wanted to, probably even non-vacant spots. If he was like, I want to go there, a university would hire him. He picks UNC, and I think he starts out hot, and they win against TCU. But yeah, Dwayne Nation, I know it was a long-winded I don't even know if I hit top 10, maybe top 8. But these are the must-watch games for college football for 2025. Texas A&M is also a must-watch. I got to get in my homer pick there, but I think that they're going to be a really, really great team this year. Marcel Reed, Le'Veon Moss, Ruben Owens. You got Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver. You got the defense with Cassius Howell, Will Lee. It's up and down. The offensive line is returning a lot. But for those who are curious if A&M's an 8-4 team, they're not. I guarantee you they will not end their season at 8-4 or lower. They just have so much. They've made progress throughout last season, throughout camp. Year 2, Mike Elko. This is kind of like a PSA, a kind of a hopeful stance I have on it, sure. But I think that Texas A&M is in line for phenomenal things this season. But Dwayne Nation, if you have any other comments, concerns, thoughts about week 1 of college football, or when you're going to see more stuff from me and Genoa for the NFL season, please drop it below. Please subscribe. We're continuing to build Dream Sports and wanting to be your sports podcast. So thank you guys for listening. And as my brother Genoa always says, peace.